How are we doing now? Fantastic. You gotta love technology. It connects us, but it does leave you wondering once in a while, doesn't it? I guess nothing's easy in life. And we certainly know that today for anyone who cares about abortion access, because while we are coming together as a set of folks to share insight on access to abortion pills and self-managed abortion care, right now the Supreme Court is hearing arguments on Texas Senate Bill 8, an incredibly harmful ban on abortion early in pregnancy. So for folks who care about bodily autonomy, about reproductive health, and the ability to plan our families and control our futures, there's a lot going on today. We know some of our friends and partners in the movement won't be able to join this conversation live. So we will be sharing a link to the video for people who are listening to the Supreme Court stream or out there on the ground, speaking out or living their day-to-day lives and wish that we didn't have to worry constantly about the endless slew of attacks on the ability to make our own healthcare decisions. Wouldn't that be nice? Let's also acknowledge that it is November 1st, and that is the beginning of Native American Heritage Month. And so we want to start this conversation also acknowledging that any of the work that we do, whether it is work to ensure that folks can plan their pregnancies, raise their children with dignity, live liberated lives. We are doing all of this work for justice in the context of great injustice throughout our history and today. We do this work on land that was stolen from Indigenous people in a country that was built by enslaved and oppressed people. If you don't know who the land that you live on and work on belongs to, truly, then visit native-land.ca. And this will tell you which tribes and sovereign nations have or do live on the land that you live and work on each day. And so as we reckon with these conversations that are rooted in a hope for human rights and justice, we must also acknowledge the history as well as the current systemic oppression that continues to harm those around us and in our communities. So if we're going to truly try to advance reproductive health, rights, and justice, we must also do all we can to speak out with and by the side of Indigenous people to dismantle white supremacy and any system that is going to hold folks back and cause harm. So with that in mind, we know there is a tremendous amount of work to be done. And so these conversations and this conversation today is part of a series to get some of that work done. And it kicked off in June, co-led by the Womxn Project, an activist and artivist group based in Rhode Island, and the Louisiana Coalition for Reproductive Freedom, wonderful statewide coalition working in Louisiana, where there is definitely a lot of great work being done. And it kicked off in June with a conversation around access to contraception. We've talked about fake clinics. We talked about sex and reproductive justice, something that is not talked about enough. We talked about young people, both the voices and needs of young people and the leadership of young people. And now we're keeping that conversation up today, talking about abortion pills and self-managed abortion care, an incredibly critical piece of the abortion access puzzle, opportunities, barriers, and all of the like. And it seems like a really good place to start with our friend Erin Matson from ReproAction. I love that ReproAction says information about abortion pills belongs to all of us. So true. And so if we're going to have this conversation, let's start there. So Erin, can you talk to us a little bit about how do people use abortion pills? What does it look like to utilize abortion pills to terminate a pregnancy?
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Morgan. So just to get us started, I'm Erin Matson. I use she, her pronouns, and I am co-founder and executive director of ReproAction. And let's talk about abortion pills because they rock. So abortion pills are have more than a 20-year track record of safety and efficacy from the Food and Drug Administration. And the process for self-managing an abortion with pills, there's two different ways to go about this. One is using both mifepristone and misoprostol. And this is the way when abortion pills are prescribed by a provider, this would be the way that people typically do it. So that entails taking mifepristone, waiting 24 hours, and then taking misoprostol. and that will complete the pregnancy. So a medication abortion, typically a person will have experience strong cramping. They will, of course, experience bleeding. There may be nausea and diarrhea that's also accompanied with it. And I think it's really important to be open about these things, that you know, anyone who has a period knows that our bodies are bloody, that this is something that happens. And so it's important to be honest about it. I also want to talk a little bit about something we talk about a lot at ReproAction, which is the World Health Organization protocol for self-managing an abortion with pills, which can be done with this mifepristone misoprostol combo. But more often when a person is self-managing, they may just have misoprostol only. And that is because, in plain English, misoprostol tends to be easier for people to get. So misoprostol, it's 85% effective, safe and effective in ending a pregnancy the first time in the first 12 weeks following this protocol. I'm going to get a little granular just in the event that there's somebody who has these pills right now and is looking to self-manage their abortion. So what it requires is 12 pills of 200 micrograms each. And it's actually super simple, the process for ending that pregnancy. 4 pills of 200 micrograms are put either like in the cheeks like this or under the tongue, you know, just directly under, held there for 30 minutes. And then a person would swallow any remaining pills. They might dissolve completely. If not, just swallow any remainders, wait 3 hours, then do the exact same thing. Take 4 more pills, either in the cheek or under the tongue, wait 30 minutes, swallow any remainders, and then wait 3 hours, and then repeat the process one last time. 4 pills in the cheeks or under the tongue, wait 30 minutes, swallow any remainder. And a person will know that the medication abortion is working when they start to experience bleeding and cramping. It is normal to bleed a significant amount. If a person experiences heavy bleeding, and I want to be very specific about what that's defined or what that is, that would be soaking 2 menstrual pads fully in more than an hour, 2, and that condition lasts for more than 2 hours. If someone is experiencing heavy bleeding or has unusual discharge with a strong smell, they should present to the emergency room to receive care. It's really important that folks note this, that the primary risk of self-managing an abortion with pills is legal and not medical, because this process is very safe and effective. But in the event there are complications, a person should immediately seek care, but be aware that the complications as well as the treatment for the complications is the exact same as for spontaneous miscarriage. So there is no reason for a person to disclose that they have taken abortion pills on their own. And in fact, doing so may expose them to legal risk. They would get the same standard of care and the care that they need doing that. So that's abortion pills in a nutshell, particularly defined in a self-managed context. I also want to lift up some colleagues and visionaries in our movement. Aid Access is a particular service that's run by Dr. Rebecca Gompertz. And Aid Access is providing abortion pill access to people in states around the country. They look at an individual state laws and provide guidance and prescribe abortion pills by mail. Again, I want to be clear, there may be legal risk involved with that. And our colleagues at If, When, How have a legal repro helpline that folks can access. But if folks are looking for one website, Aid Access would be the place that I would recommend folks take a look.
Thank you so much for giving that, really specific information. I mean, certainly when it comes to being able to make such important decisions, information is power is pretty real. And that also speaks to the fact that there are a lot of myths out there about abortion pills and about self-managed care. And I know ReproAction does a lot of work to try to dispel that misinformation. Could you clear up a few of you were thinking about some of the frequently asked questions or claims? Could you clear up a few of those for us while we've got you?
Sure, absolutely. So there are a number of myths out there. So first, and I want to say it actually just as a truth statement and then address the myth if need. But first and foremost, it's really important for people to know that self-managed abortion care is a desirable option for many people for a variety of reasons. They may just prefer having an abortion at home and the comfort of being directly with a loved one. It may be the case that folks don't want to interact with the medical system due to immigration status or gender identity and the treatment that they may receive. But self-managed abortion care is not merely a method of last resort. In fact, it's an important choice that should be more accessible to everyone. And this is something, it's not just a sky is falling, the Supreme Court is broken and has been stacked by right-wingers response. In fact, we started our work on self-managed abortion with pills before even Brett Kavanaugh got on the Supreme Court and this majority started sliding in the wrong direction. So that's one piece. And I also want to be clear that self-managed abortion with pills is not an either or with access to in-clinic care. We want to expand the number of abortion providers and access to in-clinic care in the United States. This is not a hierarchy of, one thing is better than the other. So too, self-managed abortion is not new. And if someone's telling you it's new, they're wrong. In fact, there's, I mentioned that these pills have been, in particular, mifepristone has more than a 20-year track record of being just awesome and safe and effective with the FDA. The fact of the matter is that self-managed abortion is a long-standing practice, in particular rooted in BIPOC communities of a variety of methods that folks have used to end pregnancies on their own terms. So there's a long tradition of it. Another piece that I just want to underscore, if there's anything that you remember out of what I have to say today, it's that it's safe and effective, that abortion pills are safe and effective, including when used for self-managed abortion. And we've got reams of data overseas that show that women in countries where abortion is banned have been able to use abortion pills to safely and effectively end their pregnancies. I want to acknowledge that's what the data says. The need for abortion is gender neutral, but I want to directly quote data. Another thing that comes up, so with our work, we have done a number of in-person house parties, and now we do them virtual for obvious reasons. But there's, even within the reproductive rights activist communities, we find there's a lot of misunderstanding that people think emergency contraception or Plan B and abortion pills are the same thing, and they are not. And look, this is really important because it's not, sometimes you hear people talk about it in a defensive way. Well, like, oh, well, emergency contraception is an abortion. Like there's something wrong with abortion. Hell no, there's nothing wrong with abortion. But the issue is that if somebody is using emergency contraception and they're trying to end a pregnancy, it's going to delay the abortion that they need. So if you can buy it at on the shelf at your pharmacy and it's emergency contraception, it's only going to work if a person is not pregnant already. Emergency contraception prevents implantation, and without implantation, there's no pregnancy. So emergency contraception is not going to give somebody the abortion that they're seeking. And that's a really important thing to know. And then another piece, just because I'm talking about emergency contraception, people often think they're the same things. Unfortunately, and this is a topic we've covered at ReproAction, there's a lot of anti-fat bias in medicine. And unfortunately, Plan B, the pill that is marketed as Plan B, the emergency contraception, does have guidelines for a BMI of 25 or less in order to be most effective. There are other methods of emergency contraception available, but I want to be very clear because sometimes people think abortion pills have a weight limit on them. They do not. And in fact, abortion pills will be safe and effective regardless of the weight of the patient and the person seeking the abortion.
Thank you so much. Super helpful. And especially, thank you for making it so clear that self-managed abortion care and access to abortion pills is a critical piece of the entire abortion access, movement and goal, but that it does not take the place of and is certainly not versus in any way, as some recent conversation has suggested, also ensuring that folks do have those clinic options as well. Really, we want to make sure that each person has the ability to end a pregnancy when they need or wants to in the way that meets their needs. and that it's really about more access to clinic, more access to pills, and the ability to make the decision that's best, use the method that's best, and have compassionate and affordable care. I mean, that's what we're really working towards. And so appreciate you getting that information out there. So, as we are sitting here today, talking about access, talking about information, again, while the Supreme Court's debating our access and our rights and our self-determination, what's something that you would encourage folks to do that, that's an action that they can take to help either share this education, be preaching out there in their communities too, and or, work that they can do to ensure access as well?
Yeah, 3 pieces. Number 1, don't give up. This is going to be a long fight, but you know what? I'm very confident that we are going to ultimately win and prevail, and that we will get access to reproductive health care for everyone. But I'm also clear-eyed that it's going to be a tough and brutal upcoming year and coming years. So number 1 is don't give up, and know that you'll win, that we will win, but that we've got to pace ourselves as activists. So if you need to take a break, and then come back, because we want you for the long haul for this struggle. Number 2, tie your shoes, and please do join us for Boots on the Street action. So we will definitely be outside the Supreme Court on December 1st for oral arguments outside the Supreme Court. We also have a variety of ways to take direct action in your community. So join us at reproaction.org. And number 3, just empower yourself with information. Abortion pills rock, as I say. So on our website, you can see the World Health Organization protocol for ending a pregnancy with pills. Share that information, spread that information. If you want to get in touch with us, please do. We'd love to get together with you and your colleagues or your friends and answer your questions about how these abortion pills are used. So those are my tips. Yeah.
No, I love that. Thank you. So that your top 3. Well, and that first one is so important. We do have to take care of ourselves. This is going to be continued movement. And I mean, I like to think that conversations like this one are a win. We're coming together, we're sharing information. We aren't in this alone. We are part of a movement, and that means we're part of a community. We are the majority. It's easy to forget that because our opposition is pretty loud, and they say some pretty salacious things that the media loves to repeat over and over again. Well, their bullhorns might be loud, but we've got the power of numbers, and also really just the commitment that comes from being in a place of values. It's about our health, our lives, our families, our bodily autonomy. And so I see this panel and think of all the people out there in front of the Supreme Court today, and all of your amazing organizations. Maybe we just remember that we're a community and a movement. And speaking of a movement, I know Erin move on to other because we've all got a lot going on. So we're so grateful that you were able to take time with us today. We're going to continue this conversation, but I encourage folks, while Erin goes back into the work, fight the good fight, to visit ReproAction and learn more because they're doing incredible work. But thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'm so sorry to miss the other panelists, and I will be watching the recording, and blessings to you all. Thank you. Bye.
Oh, thanks, Erin. So, I mean, and there's what it is, right? We are all managing. I popped out on you, didn't I? Again, blessings to technology. I like to joke sometimes that it's actually our opposition hacking my computer, but probably not the case. Maybe I'll call my internet provider instead. Anyway, great to hear from Erin. I think it's so important to have started just from that really specific place of making sure people get the basics. And another piece of that is reminding ourselves, with all the limits that have been put on medication abortion, it's important that we remember, in the United States, when the initial, medication abortion regimen was approved, it was seen as providing great promise. And there really was, for many, many years ago, this hopeful vision that this idea that we could continue to expand safe clinic access and affordability, that doesn't go away, but that we could also add on this availability of abortion pills for rural areas, for folks who can't get to clinics, for folks who don't want to interact with the medical system. But we have seen barrier after barrier that has made that exciting vision a little challenging. And so our friend, Anna Bernstein from the Century Foundation is going to talk to us a little bit about that. You know, what does that vision look like? What did it look like? What limitations have we seen? But of course, from a position of strength, because the fight goes on, what can we be doing? You know, what can we be doing moving forward? So Anna, take it away.
Great, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. Let's just share my screen so y'all can see some graphics we have. Again, my name is Anna Bernstein. I'm a healthcare policy fellow at the Century Foundation, and I'm really excited to be here today to talk a little bit about, you know, what the landscape really looks like today with remote provision of medication abortion and kind of how that differs from maybe the original vision when it was approved by the FDA in 2000. So as Erin gave us, you know, such a great setup, mifepristone has been available in the US to some extent since 2000 when it was approved by the FDA, and really offered an opportunity to change the landscape of abortion access in the US. And as Erin said, we now have over 2 decades of evidence that medication abortion care, particularly with mifepristone and misoprostol, is incredibly safe and effective and can be administered by patients in their homes or wherever they choose. Unfortunately, the laws and regulations that surround mifepristone don't exactly match up to the safety and efficacy. So I'm sure we'll hear about this during the panel, but the Fda restrictions on mifepristone, known as REMS, risk evaluation and mitigation strategy, restrict who can administer the drug, where it can be dispensed, and other regulations. And I think it's important to point out that of over 20,000 FDA approved medications, mifepristone is the only one that has to be dispensed in a clinical setting, but is taken by patients at home or wherever they choose. And we now have, in addition to, you know, the evidence from abroad that Erin mentioned, we have evidence in the US from studies like the Teleabortion Project, as well as some changes in how the REMS have been enforced during the pandemic that show that we can do telemedicine provision of abortion really safely in the US. And I mean, I think we all know how much telehealth has increased in general during the pandemic. You know, in April 2020, the use of telehealth was almost 80 times higher than it was in February of 2020. And it's, you know, gone down a bit, but it's still stabilized at almost 40 times the pre-pandemic baseline. So folks are using telehealth to really both avoid, you know, exposure to things like COVID, but also just because it fits into their lives a little easier. And so for medication abortion, that's really a simple and straightforward solution because the pills are already taken at home. We know there's no medical need for an in-person visit. And, you know, pandemic aside, we know that there's solutions that we need to harness to expand access to abortion care in the US, just given the state of access. So the vast majority of counties in the US don't have abortion providers, nearly 90%, which is, you know, a large number, and that's almost 40% of reproductive age women who live in those counties. And of course, we know more than women seek abortion, but you know, echoing Erin in terms of what the data say here, it's almost 40% of women that live in counties without access to abortion providers. And overcoming these barriers to access like travel and associated costs like transportation, time off work, childcare, because we know that most people seeking abortion are already parents. That really hits people who are struggling to make ends meet and people of color hardest. And I think it's important to center that when we're talking about these access issues. And, you know, even for people who can reach a clinic, as Erin mentioned, there might be other reasons to prefer telehealth. For queer and trans folks seeking abortion, there's additional layers of stigma. The presence of protesters can be distressing to patients, obviously, particularly Black and Brown patients given that the anti-abortion movement in the US is deeply tied to white supremacy. So even now, as the REMS have been currently lifted in the US, allowing some telehealth provision of abortion, states have passed their own laws to make that impossible. So 19 states explicitly ban the use of telemedicine for medication abortion care. And I'm sure, this will come up throughout today's discussion, but this is just one type of restriction on abortion care and medication abortion care in particular that is not based in evidence. And so even in states that don't have these laws, like these 19, there's other laws that kind of make it impossible for patients to receive abortion care via telehealth. So there's in-person counseling requirements, which are often paired with mandatory waiting periods, and that makes it not only necessary to visit a clinic, but often to visit a clinic twice and double that time off work, that travel time. And so I've included some quotes here from folks that are actually providing abortion care via telemedicine to sort of illustrate how this can really change the landscape for us. So Leah Copeland, who at the time was providing in Maine, she's a nurse midwife and abortion provider, just points out, I think people obviously have so many associations with abortion clinics, protesters, stigma. So when they're able to use telemedicine for abortion care, they just don't have to take half day off work. They don't have to find childcare. It fits into their day. And Dr. Kaneshiro in Hawaii echoed this. It's not just about protesters and things like that. They can do the visit in 30 minutes. They don't need to take time off work, drive any place, commute. So just like I'm sure we've all realized with our own telehealth visits that it fits better into our day, the same is true for medication abortion care. And Dr. Jamie Pfeiffer of Abortion on Demand, and they provide, Abortion on Demand provides abortion care via telehealth in over 20 states. So they're not going through what some people consider a traumatic experience. They're not having to engage in a traditional, frankly, patriarchal healthcare system. They're just in their car, they're in their living room, they're breastfeeding their baby. And I think this is such an important and common theme when you're talking to folks that provide and have abortions. The abortion care itself is not traumatic, but the experience that's created by unnecessary laws, restrictions, the stigma and protesters, that's what makes this experience traumatic for folks seeking abortion. And one abortion storyteller, Lexi, who works with We Testify, an abortion storytelling group, explained that even in states that we consider really friendly to abortion rights, like Massachusetts, where Lexi sought her abortion, said, even though we have a good number of clinics, there's some places that are still far out. It's a whole day process to get care. And what if you don't have a car? So I think expanding this beyond obviously rural areas, counties without abortion providers are places where folks might want to self-manage or use telehealth for abortion care. But even in places like Boston that we might think, that's an easier place to access an abortion, telehealth can really expand access for folks there. And I think something that, Lexi also brings up here in terms of internet access is, when we think about self-managing and telehealth, we also have to think about this digital divide. There's over 40 million people in the US that don't have access to broadband. So just hand in hand with expanding telehealth access is also expanding access to internet and technology that allows people to use that service. And, as Erin said, I just want to reiterate that, this isn't either or. Some folks will never want to use telehealth or self-manage. Some folks will always want to do that. And so it's key that we're really ensuring access to in-person care for folks who want it or need it. And obviously, that's really driven home today by the SCOTUS arguments that are currently going on about SB 8. And I will stop sharing.
Thanks so much, Anna. And really, we're having all these connected conversations where the pandemic and people having a need to be able to utilize things like telehealth really has amped up these conversations around things like broadband access or the very specific limits that are only placed on access to medication abortion. And yet, the other pieces that you outlined of health disparities and racial inequity in the health system certainly did not start with the pandemic. And the complications that come from having to find childcare or take time off to seek an abortion also are going to fall heavier on people who are already struggling to get access to healthcare, to make a living wage, to get by. And that's so intrinsically linked to the inherent systemic racism in all of our systems. So it's important that we're continuing to talk about this, not just in the sense of the global pandemic, but as we think we're developing strategies moving forward, that we make sure that those strategies are truly going to ensure abortion access for all and expanded access for all. And you showed that great graphic, well, not great, horrific graphic of the telemedicine limitations for folks who want to find out more, learn about that and other laws and requirements that might exist in your state. One great resource is our friends over at the Guttmacher Institute. So that's GUTTMACHER.org. And you can find for your state what the particular limitations are, not just on telemedicine access, but any of the restrictions that exist on abortion, requirements for access to contraception. You can find out good information about reproductive health broadly. And so that's a way to get policy information, but it's not just the laws that are limiting access to telemedicine and getting in the way of the ability to use medication abortion to ensure that folks have more options and or the option that makes the most sense for them and what they want and the experience that they want. But also the fact that there's legal ramifications and legal questions, which Erin alluded to, and our next panelist will be educating us more on. Because we know that there have actually been several court cases because people chose to end their pregnancies outside of a medical setting and in response to folks utilizing self-managed care for whatever reason. And so we want to make sure that people understand what's going on with this and can help be part of pushing back as well as protecting their own, health rights and liberty. So the National Advocates for Pregnant Women defends people who are pregnant and attempt to have an abortion or are mistaken. They may have experienced a pregnancy loss, but are seen as in the criminal system, are interrogated, could even be charged. And so we're really so thrilled that Lynn Paltrow from National Advocates for Pregnant Women is here to tell us a little bit more about that. So this is a big topic. So as brief an overview, whatever brief means, because we do want to understand what's going on, Lynn. But what is happening around these laws, these abortion access bans and limitations? How does that intersect with pregnancy loss, pregnancy criminalization, birth equity? Tiny question, I'm sure. Go for it. Yeah. And go ahead and take yourself off mute, my friend.
Thank you.
Thank you
For having me and learned so much from our two previous speakers. Just to riff off of some of the things folks said, I was once at a conference of very smart doctors who thought they were going to invent the cure for drug addiction. They're going to come up with some drug that was going to magically fix that part of the human brain and the human experience. And very much like what was once called RU486 and the medications that effectively work to end pregnancy, it isn't just a matter of coming up with something that works. It is coming up with something that works and is available to people despite white supremacy and male supremacy. And we see that around COVID too, that so much of what happened that could have brought us together was politicized. So it became a mechanism for division. In terms of the criminal law or being arrested, National Advocates for Pregnant Women believes that no one should be arrested or subjected to arrest or prosecution because of pregnancy or any outcome of pregnancy. And we provide pro bono criminal defense, among other things, for people who are arrested in relationship to their pregnancies. Most of the people we represent have not attempted to have an abortion and didn't want to end their pregnancy. They're people who went to term or who tried to go to term, but they do include also women who've been prosecuted for attempting or being perceived to have an illegal abortion. What people, and illegal by which I mean outside of the approved medical settings. One thing I want to be very clear about is many of the cases we work on involve prosecutions in which women are accused of experiencing miscarriages or stillbirths that they caused by what? By taking methamphetamine or opioids or any of the criminalized drugs. And I just want to say, I don't know why the prosecutors are lying to women. They are suggesting that those drugs are good at causing pregnancy losses. None of them, not methamphetamine, not marijuana, not opioids, cause pregnancy losses. If you're trying to end your pregnancy, don't listen to the prosecutors, listen to Erin and the other people on this panel. You want to use the medications misoprostol and mifepristone and use them according to the directions. If any of those criminalized drugs were good at causing pregnancy loss, I suspect that many more women in Texas would be using them, but they know that they don't. What we also know is while approximately 8 states have laws on the books that specifically authorize arrests in relationship to abortion, if you have a self-managed abortion, if you solicit an abortion, you can be prosecuted. Most of those laws are currently treated as unconstitutional. Whether or not there's a specific law in your state, what's really happening is we are seeing the effect of mass criminalization and vigilante prosecutors. What do I mean by that? Most of the cases we've worked on involving a prosecution because a police officer or a local prosecutor thought that somebody had tried to have an abortion, they're not arrested for an abortion crime, they're arrested for manslaughter. They're arrested for feticide, murder of a fetus, either from the moment of that covers the unborn from the moment of conception or after viability. They're charged with the crime of neglect of a dependent. What we know is as a result of the war on drugs, something that was very targeted to Black people and poor people, we have thousands and thousands and thousands of crimes that exists under federal law, tens of thousands of criminal laws under state criminal codes, and prosecutors choose from them. So they might do, instead of charging somebody with an illegal abortion, and one of the big hoaxes that are being carried out is many of the recent abortion statutes, the 6-week bans, the 15-week bans, do 2 things. They add a provision that says the unborn should be treated as separate constitutional rights-bearing persons. And they also say, don't worry, the woman herself can't be arrested. The person themselves who has an abortion can't be arrested under this new abortion law. The hoax is that they don't need that abortion law to find some statute under which they can prosecute somebody for doing something in relationship to their pregnancy that the local prosecutor or police officer doesn't approve of. So what we have to understand is that how we think about and work on these issues has to be collaborative. Crimes that women have been charged with in relationship to their pregnancies are delivery of drugs to a minor. That can be misoprostol or mifepristone. Kenlecia Jones in Georgia, who was believed to have taken misoprostol and mifepristone, was charged not only with a murder charge, but also use of a dangerous drug, because in Georgia, it's listed that way. Both of those crimes, thankfully, in part because of our intervention and earlier law that we had worked on there, those charges were dropped. But what we know is in a country that has responded to so many health problems through the criminal law system, mental health issues, inability to access the care that people need, that we are already, as a result of NAPW's documentation, we all know that we're seeing almost triple the number of arrests in relationship to pregnancy. We documented them from 1973 to 2005. We've documented them now. We are in the process of documenting them now between 2006 and 2020, and they're triple the number of arrests, 1,200 arrests in relationship to pregnancy. Fortunately, very, very few are based on an allegation of having an abortion outside the legal system. Part of what our brief to the Supreme Court in the upcoming Dobbs case was that is likely to change if they overturn Roe and if they in any way advance the idea that states may regulate the lives and bodies of the people who get pregnant based on claims of state interests in fetal rights, in state interests in fetal health. that what Roe and Casey actually stand for is the personhood of the people who can get pregnant at all stages of pregnancy. And while there are state interests in potential life, and there's state interests in life and health, they can be exercised in very limited ways, and limitations on those ways must be, you cannot respond to any aspect of pregnancy through the use of the criminal law system.
Thanks so much. I'm just taking it all in. And I mean, it's such an important conversation, especially, of course, to be having today, because, you know, for folks who don't know, and I think a lot of us are certainly aware, but the Texas bill, isn't just a ban on abortion early in pregnancy, but is also creating this, whole dragnet where someone who helps someone get an abortion can be sued. And so this conversation, Lynn, that you're helping us to have about sort of that intersection between, mass incarceration and white supremacy and really undermining birth equity and abortion rights. I mean, it's incredibly complex and can be hard for folks to sort of see. And, one thing that really came out when you were just speaking for me too, was that abortion stigma, I feel like, has also put some advocates in this position of feeling like they have to compromise when it comes to some of these laws. And they'll say, this won't impact abortion. This is just going to be Unborn Violence Act, or it's just going to be about trying to push women to get drug treatment when they're pregnant. But don't worry, it's not going to cause harm, or it's not going to result in pregnancy criminalization. And it does really create this slippery slope that does end up undermining our rights, that's fueling these abortion bans and fueling mass incarceration. Could you talk a little bit about how you've seen some of that play out in your work?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have to we can get very simple and clear. One of the things that I want to challenge people to do, and that I feel challenged by, is every time there's an article about what Roe v. Wade is going to do to abortion rights and stops there, it ignores all of the things it's going to do beyond the horror of making it impossible or making it very difficult for people to access abortion services. We have been listening to a rhetoric for 50 years, equating those who have abortions with murderers. They keep trying to say, oh no, we're just trying to stop abortion. We do care about women's health. We care about making their rich lives be able to continue. This is one of the lines from the governor of Texas. But if you spend 50 years calling a group of people murderers, saying what they do is worse than what was done in Nazi Germany, carried out by Hitler's SS, it is a kind of defamation of the people who get pregnant, of women, and it has carried out. So if you can think of them as murderers, what do we do to murderers? We arrest them. We put them in jail. So our pushback has to be beyond, it's my right to an abortion, which it is. It has to be, it is my right to be a full constitutional person and not fear that I will be treated in the most stigmatizing way, not just, because I had an abortion, but because you've given the public permission to see me as a criminal. That has got to stop as well.
Absolutely. No, I mean, that is so very important to think about. We spend so much time on the court cases and the laws, as well we should, and there's certainly a heck of a lot of need to, but also, being thoughtful to think about what is the agenda and what are all the ramifications, if Roe was to be overturned, not just what it means for abortion rights, but of course, NAPW's brief around what it would mean to birth equity and maternal health, overall. And you mentioned that brief, but could you just tell us a little bit more, sort of who was involved and, what would you say is the sort of core central piece within that brief to the court? And again, this is for the case that will be heard 1 month from today. So we don't just have exciting Supreme Court events to start November, but also to start December. The hits keep coming. But could you talk a little bit about that brief?
Yes, our brief on behalf of National Advocates for Pregnant Women and 12 other organizations concerned with none of them are abortion advocacy groups. They're all birth equity, birthing rights groups that care about stillbirth and pregnancy loss, because as Casey, a subsequent decision to Roe, said, it has been for those people who want to be protected in giving birth and not worry about being forced or coerced to have abortions or be sterilized. Roe stands for them as well. Roe has protected all people who have the capacity for pregnancy. And what very few people remember is that it was not until 1972 that the Supreme Court ever said that the 14th Amendment protected women from sex discrimination. That was the first time. And actually, Roe had been filed the year before, 1971, and re-argued the year after. So in 1973, there had been barely a year of saying, you know what, under our Constitution, women are equal, have equal rights or protection for equality. But it didn't talk about pregnancy yet. And what Roe did, a little indirectly, but by deciding that fetuses are not persons, that constitutional personhood under the 14th Amendment, which says applies to all persons born, applies only to all persons born. And that includes the people who get pregnant through all stages of pregnancy. And what Roe did was establish, really for the very first time, that people who get pregnant are also full constitutional persons. And that is part of what we're defending in this brief and in our work, not just the right to abortion, but the personhood of the people who sometimes need abortions, who overwhelmingly give birth and ensure the survival of our species, and who also typically experience miscarriages and stillbirths. And so much of our brief to the Supreme Court is, please don't think this is just about the people who want to end their pregnancies. It is about half the people in the United States who have the capacity for pregnancy, who are entitled to the health care that they need. Some of that health care is abortion. All of it is based on the right to their personhood and equity in the provision in the application of laws and the provision of health care.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, and that really is so important for folks to remember, that it's not abortion or not abortion, different points in people's lives, and that the same sorts of arguments that we hear to try to undermine access to abortion are used to try to restrict access to contraception, and that the same sorts of folks we see speaking out to end access to abortion are the same folks who are pushing, punitive laws that are fueling mass incarceration in other ways. And so, it's both sort of that agenda, and the actors are so important to pay attention to, particularly from a place of reproductive justice, where we really are trying to advance, a larger vision of the kind of world that we want to live in. So that if folks who want to say, well, abortion isn't my fight, I don't care that much about abortion, well, don't love that, get engaged. It's important to a lot of people in your lives, because everyone does know someone and love someone who's had an abortion, but also maybe think bigger and realize that there is so much at stake in addition to access to abortion. Really appreciate you, helping us to be thinking about that. And, whether someone is self-managing abortion, was that because they were unable to access clinical care, or because that was, what felt like the best option for them, or folks who are being caught up in the criminal system, sort of because of this anti-abortion agenda that you talked about, Lynn, no one should be punished for ending their own pregnancy. And so we had hoped that our friends from If, When, How would be able to join us today, but because there is so much going on in this moment, they weren't. And so we're going to share some information out on the two organizations, so the Womxn Project and the Louisiana Coalition for Reproductive Freedom, who are co-leading this panel series. We will share some information about a really important new endeavor that If, When, How is leading to defend people seeking care who are caught up in the criminal system, or just folks who have questions about how what Lynn has been talking about really can fall onto individuals, how this politics is on the backs of real people, and largely, Black, Indigenous, other people of color, low-income folks, young folks, LGBT folks. And so If, When, How has a new Repro Legal Defense Fund. They have a hotline. So they will be helping folks who are charged and are caught up in the legal system, and then also providing advice and support. And so we will share information about that. And then also, as mentioned earlier, really by everyone in different ways, the pandemic didn't just shine a spotlight on, overall inequities, but also really the harms of these inequities when they're so laser focused on access to abortion. And we've had to have this whole abortion as essential healthcare conversation that, many of us have been having for years, but really in a fight back as folks in Texas and many other states tried to say that abortion was not essential healthcare during the pandemic. We had also hoped that our friends at the National Women's Health Network would be able to join us today, but we're going to instead share some information about the work that they've been doing, both in legal challenges to some of the restrictions on the ability to get abortion pills, as well as just really a robust conversation that we're so happy is happening about the fact that people should be able to, not just get care in a clinic, get care telehealth, but get those abortion pills in the mail. They're safe. That they could be prescribed remotely, delivered by mail to be able to enhance access and truly, meet people's needs in all the ways. And so we're going to share information about those two different very important initiatives that are happening, that are really trying to, meet people where they're at, where those challenges exist to access, where those challenges exist because of these harmful laws and the very real consequences that they have in people's lives. But when it comes down to it, what Lynn, you were really emphasizing is such an important pivot to our next panelists, because the work that's being done is about, the kind of legislation that we need and the kind of access we need, but it's also really calling out what is happening to fuel that abortion stigma and to fuel that misinformation. And what we have seen is it's not just all the various creative ways to make it that much harder. We're going to take insurance away. We're going to make you make multiple clinic visits. You can't get pills in the mail. Well, how have folks been able to sort of get away with that? Well, it is some of what was talked about in the way that people who seek abortion care are demonized, but it's also this really anti-science misinformation and myths that are being put out there that cause harm, that fuel stigma, and that put up very real barriers. And our friend Michelle Ehrenberg from Lift Louisiana has been facing that up close. And so Michelle's here to talk about a bill that came up in Louisiana this year that's sort of an example of that very insidious strategy that's also being moved to try to take away our ability to get an abortion when we need or want one. So Michelle, can you tell us about the legislation and some of the claims that were being made around medication abortion within this campaign to try to diminish access in your state?
Sure, thank you. Well, I guess I'll start with the first part or the second part, because this isn't something that just occurred in Louisiana. This has been a campaign for the last 5 or 6 years of states requiring abortion providers to give information to patients that have like unverified claims about medication abortion, and specifically saying that medication abortion can be reversed if patients are given a high dose of progesterone to stop the abortion after they take the first pill, mifepristone. And so there's no medical evidence to support this assertion, and there's no data on the safety of this. And a lot of this is relying on really flawed research that has not been peer reviewed, doesn't have control groups, uses really small sample sizes. And the only peer-reviewed study that actually did look at this progesterone protocol to quote unquote reverse a medication abortion was done in 2019, and they had to end it early because women were hemorrhaging. People were bleeding out under this protocol. Like 25% of the participants that were enrolled in the study. And so not only is there no research that backs up that this could be effective in reversing or stopping a medication abortion, but it actually has some serious safety risk involved as well. So that's sort of the background of this. And in Louisiana, in this last legislative session, a very conservative lawmaker introduced House Bill 578. And this would have required physicians give their patients information about medication abortion that was really just designed. These are all just designed to misinform and confuse people. And it was very interesting. I mean, just like an unbelievable exhibit of hypocrisy, the same legislature also introduced an anti-vaccine piece of legislation that was, you know, the whole premise of that was based on there's not enough evidence to support the vaccines. The vaccines aren't FDA approved. And literally in the same hearing, she was getting up and pushing this this protocol that was not FDA approved and had no research behind it. So that's just what it's like doing policy in Louisiana. And so they, in order to sort of avoid legal challenge, they introduced this bill so that it wouldn't have required that the physicians actually orally deliver this information. It would only be written, so that they're, you know, to inoculate themselves from a free speech challenge, which have been successful in blocking these laws in other states. And they also wanted to require that the state health department post information on their website. And so the exact language that they wanted handed out to people seeking medication abortion and for the state to put on their website would have said that recent research has indicated that the first pill provided, identified as mifepristone, is not always effective in ending pregnancy. You may be able to avoid, cease, or reverse the intended effects of a chemically induced abortion if the second pill provided, identified as misoprostol, is not taken. If you want to discuss the possibility of continuing your pregnancy, please consult your physician or healthcare provider. And then it refers to a website that the Louisiana Department of Health would have been required to create to also post this information. So luckily, there was a lot of pushback from the Louisiana Department of Health and from physicians, and their lobbying groups got heavily involved in the fight. And even some of the very conservative legislators that were in charge of the state health committees had big concerns about this. It was actually one of the few restrictive, like abortion-related bills that has been introduced in Louisiana in the past few years that had, you know, I mean, an overwhelming number of legislators voting against it. Not enough to kill it, but certainly a big pushback on this. So we were able to work with legislators and with some of the physicians advocates and the Department of Health to amend the bill to be less harmful. So they removed the requirement that the Department of Health post this information on their website. We were able to get them to remove all the information implying that abortion, you know, medication abortion could be reversed. But we were not able to completely stop them from handing, you know, a piece of paper to patients indicating that there was some sort of research that indicated that a medication abortion is not effective. And so I think, you know, it was a mixed bag in terms of how this ended up playing out. But I think that it was really important to remove the misinformation that would be pushing people to seek information about this untested and dangerous protocol. So that is kind of where things landed on that legislation. But I think one of the things that we learned from this is it was extremely important to get the Louisiana Department of Health and the physicians advocacy organizations and associations involved in pushing back on this.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. No, that's fantastic. It sounds like such an important strategy. And I know that, you know, you all are operating around that bill at the same time that you had your own bans on abortion early in pregnancy and limitation after limitation on young people's access to abortion care. And so, you know, really emphasizes that it's not just one kind of, you know, barrier and, you know, really claims about abortion that are incorrect that are being pushed to advance this legislation. It's one thing after the other in layers, right? And I think what's so interesting is that for some people who aren't involved as much in abortion advocacy, it might sound just preposterous and unbelievable that the state health department would be being required to essentially lie to folks. And yet we see this time and again, state materials, state mandated materials with lies about the safety of abortion, about consequences of abortion. And we've seen this in many states. And so this is a strategy that started with so-called informed consent pamphlets, and they had taken to a new extreme. And so then with the work that you were able to do, and you're able to sort of mitigate, the harm of that legislation. And then I know you're also trying to push back on some of the lies that are happening with the fake clinics in your state too, yes?
Yeah, a lot of the information about this so-called abortion reversal is really coming out of the crisis pregnancy centers, and many of them are even promoting this this idea and this bad information on their websites and pushing it towards people. We've also seen some billboards going up around the state promoting abortion pill reversal and sending people to a website where they're going to get a lot of really bad information that could be very dangerous to them. So we are working right now to launch a campaign this month to counter some of that information. And we're doing a big public awareness campaign about the safety and efficacy of medication abortion. We'll have billboards, we'll have ads, we'll have, we'll be all over social media on this. And at the same time, we are investigating the public funding that is going to crisis pregnancy centers and are working to try to convince legislators to pull back some of that funding and shift it towards areas of the budget that really are going to be supporting pregnant people and their ability to raise families.
That's huge. And I mean, that's really exciting because it seems so insurmountable, these constant attacks that you're enduring, and yet you're soldiering on and pushing on. And what an important conversation to be able to start and have of where should state funding be going, and it should be going to actually meeting the needs of the communities. And so that education that you're doing is really important. And there are proactive bills also around medication abortion and access in various places around the country too. I mean, we certainly know it's important for people to understand the onslaught of limitations that are happening, but we do also, want to sort of shine a light or two. So there are efforts like Michelle's group trying to, instead of having money fund fake clinics, fund actual health services that are going to meet people's needs. There are also proactive bills that are happening in different areas. California actually requires public universities to provide access to abortion pills on campuses. And Hawaii just had a bill that allows advanced practice registered nurses, so a wider array of health professionals, to be able to provide medication abortion care. So there's good examples of fighting back across political contexts and across the various challenges that we are facing. And then, of course, there's the really important work that folks like National Advocates for Pregnant Women and F1 How are doing to actively defend and ensure that people who are caught up in the consequences of these laws have the support they need, and then must, with everything going on in Texas, acknowledge the work of abortion funds, who are more than ever having to step in and mitigate the consequences of the kind of restrictions that we're talking about, whether it's helping many folks in Texas come on over to you in Louisiana, Michelle, or to various other states in order to get care, or folks who are helping to get young people through the system to get the abortions that they need. There's a lot of really great work going out there. So we can acknowledge the attacks and also, be comforted by the incredible organizing that's happening in every state throughout the country to push back. And sort of with that in mind, that there are real challenges, there's work to do. We're going to have to keep coming together and having these conversations, but there is progress being made, either legislative wins or the win of when we just don't give up and we keep fighting back. with that in mind, could each of you share a thought? What is something, if someone listens to this, if they listen to it now, or they listen to it tonight, a few days from now, and they're inspired, angry, all of the above, what's something, one or two things that you would encourage folks to think about, to do, to consider, an action they can take? I will start with Anna, because you had a little bit more time to think about this than the other panelists. So what's something that you would encourage folks to do if they're feeling angry, inspired, or all of the above?
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think continuing in the proactive policy space, I can speak more to the federal space. There's a few really promising bills in Congress that I think if folks can support, reach out to their Congress people. The first is the Women's Health Protection Act, or WIPA, which would create a right to abortion and a right to provide abortion. Really just doing, even in the absence of these Supreme Court cases, is important, because we know that Roe is not enough. It's never been enough. So it would really just make a landscape of abortion access without burdensome, medically unnecessary laws, like some of the ones we've spoken about today. And then I think the second is, which would, I think abortion is only accessible if it's affordable. And when women of color-led groups like All Above All and Abortion Funds, a national network of abortion funds, have really been leading in the space of removing the Hyde Amendment and other budget riders that really discriminate against people struggling to make ends meet in terms of abortion access, as well as folks who rely on the government for their insurance and their health care. So each and WIPA, I think, are two bright spots in the federal policy landscape that could really change how abortion access looks in this country.
Thank you. Yeah, those are really important pieces of legislation for folks to be aware of. So you can go on and learn more about those. And then also, because we want to care about and should and do about the rights and health of folks around the world, there's also the Abortion is Healthcare Everywhere Act and the Global HER Act, because we are exporting a racist anti-abortion agenda around the world through spending bills. And so in addition to the Women's Health Protection Act, which, as Anna mentioned, gets rid of a lot of those medically unnecessary restrictions, and the EACH Act, which gets rid of health coverage bans for abortion for people who use public health insurance programs, there are the other two pieces that are also addressing these limitations globally. And of course, local action, so important. So that's going to be a pivot to you in a minute, Michelle. But in your state too, does your state have a ban on health coverage for abortion? And many states do. And so looking to see if there are activities going on. So with this conversation being co-led by the Womxn Project, they have a bill called the Equal Access and Abortion Coverage Act, EACA. And they're trying to get rid of the state ban in Rhode Island. And there are a lot of places where either bills have been introduced or movement is being built to get there. The limitations that exist in almost every state for young people's access to abortion, there are not enough states that are yet poised to take that on legislatively. But there's a lot of movement and work happening. And I hope desperately, my fingers and toes crossed right now, that more states are going to actively be educating on this issue and the harm, and really talking about and organizing so that we can build movement also to get rid of those harmful limitations. But it's organizing, it's education, and so much of it is happening locally. So, thinking about that, Michelle, the work that you're doing in Louisiana or, states broadly, what do you think people can be doing and should be doing?
Well, I definitely would echo the call for the Women's Health Protection Act, because that would really help those of us that are working on these policies at a state level that are up against very conservative legislators. It would really give us the ammunition that we needed to push back on a lot of these restrictions that are just running amok. The other thing that I would say is for folks to invest their time and resources into organizations that are working at the state level, especially those that are working in conservative states that are, that are really the worst actors when it comes to a lot of these restrictions on abortion, and to invest in the abortion funds and the organizations that are providing practical support, because we really are looking at a future, could be a very near future in which people in Louisiana, Texas, Mississippi, all across the Gulf South really do not have access to abortion care in their states anymore. And so we need to be supporting the organizations that are doing our best to fight back on that future, and also the organizations that are planning to support people if and when that day comes. And then the last thing that I would say, and this might tee Lynn up a little bit, is we do a lot of work with lawyers because we work on judicial bypass issues with young people, and we do a lot of advocacy with lawyers. And lawyers are so important to this movement, and we need more lawyers to get in this fight, to do the pro bono work, to work with organizations like Lynn's, like Lift Louisiana, like If, When, How, to basically be ready to go to court and defend people's constitutional right to abortion, whether that's in criminal cases that may be brought or in civil cases. So my shout out to all the lawyers out there. We need you in this fight in a big way.
Absolutely. Yeah. Huge shout out to folks who are, stepping up and, using whatever skills, if it's somebody who can provide a health service, it's somebody who's defending in court. It's somebody who can go to their local school board and advocate. Like, we all have a role to play in this work. And there is something that each of us can do. So, whether you've got 5 minutes to give or $5 to give, or you can volunteer the heck out of your days, whatever it might be, we all have a role to play in this movement, and we're all so needed more than ever. And so, Lynn, as folks are feeling pretty fired up with what's going on, what do you hope they're going to be up to? What are you going to call people out there to do with us? Oh, you are on mute, my friend.
I'll start. I wrote a short piece called "Why I'm Still Hopeful Despite Texas and Mississippi and Ms." And one of the many reasons I remain hopeful is before Roe v. Wade, when abortion was banned in every state, it was estimated that 200,000 to 1 million women had abortions anyway. As much as they might try to control human bodies and lives, it does not work in the long run. And we know that mass civil disobedience, as modeled by the civil rights movement in the United States and others around the world, have had very big impact. And even though the people who have abortions, in spite of criminalization, don't see themselves necessarily as political actors, collectively, it is a form of mass civil disobedience that was so present that many people believe that was partly how we got Roe v. Wade in the first place, the pressure of all of those people defying the law and doing what they need to do for their health care. So I take a lot of hope in that. In terms of, I love the suggestions that we've heard already. I will say that imagine what we could win if we recognized that for those who are passionate about abortion rights, that they are completely connected to the people who are working for voting rights, who are working to ensure that, for example, Black Lives Matters. One of the things I point out is a goal, a purpose of, I think, the personhood movement that's focused on fertilized eggs, embryos, and fetuses, is to distract our attention, our cultural resources from real personhood movements. That's what Black Lives Matters is. That's what every feminist organization is. It is a real personhood movement. And we have to recognize that we share with the drug policy movement, with voting rights, that we can bring our commitment to reproductive health and rights and carry that out in all of the other places we might also exist and want to contribute some of our time. I know being intersectional can make you exhausted, but anytime we can make the connection, think of what we can build. And this conversation has given me one more suggestion. If you're looking for a place to focus, if you're looking for some action, talk to your local prosecutor, because they have enormous discretion. And groups like Fair and Just Prosecution and Color of Change are putting pressure on prosecutors to refrain from using that discretion to arrest people for having abortions, for experiencing miscarriages and stillbirths, for being pregnant and whatever it is, whether it's falling down a flight of stairs or drugs. And also finally, to give hope, we have new allies. We have allies at the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers who've just written this report explaining how the thousands of criminal laws that exist not only can be used against the people who have abortions for pregnancy outcomes, one of the things National Advocates for Pregnant Women focuses on, but how the criminal law system is set up to create opportunities to prosecute, arrest anybody who helps anyone obtain the reproductive health care that they need, the abortion care that they need. And these are, as you suggest, these are defense lawyers who we're going to work with, who we are already working to train so that we can ensure that if you are caught up in that criminal justice system, you will not be alone and your rights will be defended.
Well, I love a conversation where I have new friends to make. I can't say I was hanging out with my local prosecutors too much, but now I definitely take the assignment that Lynn would give very seriously. Whenever you give an assignment, Lynn, I'm ready. I'm at the ready. So there are, and the point of that really is, that there are conversations that can be had. Again, I always will say, whether it's that you are someone who can show up at your state house or can go stand in front of the Supreme Court, or you can wear a Fund Abortion t-shirt while you drop your kid off at preschool and have a conversation, or at the grocery store, wearing, I like to wear my pro-abortion tank top or sweatshirt. Shout out to Avow, Texas. They have fantastic pro-abortion gear. That definitely will get conversations started every time I've worn it. And whether it is that you go to your local prosecutor's office and it feels very formal, or an informal checkout line chat, all of that is movement building, and all of it matters. And again, points to that we can find hope, as Lynn mentioned, in the fact that we each do have a role to play, and we each do have an opportunity to act in small and large ways to do the work that matters. And there are so many opportunities, and it can feel overwhelming. So we will go back to Erin's reminder that we take care of ourselves. And that each day, maybe we can do one thing, or each week we can do one thing, have a conversation, sign a petition. There are call to actions right now for the Biden administration to decriminalize self-managed abortion. Then there's long-term work around over-the-counter access to abortion pills, and there's everything in between. There's a great work being done at the local level by organizations like Michelle's. There's incredibly important work being done by folks like the National Advocates for Pregnant Women and If, When, How to defend folks. There is something that you can engage in and be part of. And to that end, I will say, get out your pencils, pens, or computers and mark your calendar for November 16th. And that is the next conversation in the series. And it is speaking about redistricting and representation. So to go to something that Lynn was pointing out, the work that we are doing is so linked. Voting rights is linked to racial justice and linked to access to abortion. And it very much comes down to us each having a voice and using our voice in the system. And so this November 16th, 12:30 Eastern, 11:30 Central, 10:30 Mountain, 9:30 Pacific. I could keep specific, but I could keep going, but I don't know. I think that's good. Mark your calendars, November 16th, to join us and hear from a really exciting panel talking about how do you get involved in fair map efforts in your state? What does redistricting even mean? Gerrymandering, it's a term that gets thrown around. What does that mean? How does it impact issues that we care about, like abortion? So join us for that conversation. And then in the meantime, we are in this, we talk about this as a season of giving. Well, as Michelle said, if you can give some time or if you can give some money, ideally both, let's do that. Whether it's finding a mutual aid effort near you, like a diaper bank or a food bank or an abortion fund, finding a group you can volunteer with. Many groups are getting ready for their state legislative sessions right now. They could use your time. They could use your resources. Whatever it is that you can give, we need it, because we sit here in this moment where our rights are being argued as we speak, and our options and our opportunities. But this conversation shows there's people out there fighting hard, brilliant, amazing, passionate people. So we are incredibly grateful to you all for giving your time, and also to Erin And we will continue to share information. We'll continue to have conversation and build community together. And that is what keeps me hopeful, and tells me that there will be bumps along the road, as there are, but we will win because we are not alone. We are in this together and we are strong. So thank you so, so much. Get some rest, all of you. Thank you for your work. Thank you in advance for all you're doing. And we'll be talking very soon again. So take care of yourself. Enjoy some of that Halloween candy. Bye.